Good evening, everyone, and thank you to those of you joining us online. If we could call the meeting to order, and if we could please rise for the national anthem and the land acknowledgement.
We would like to acknowledge
that we are here today
on the traditional territory
of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Nous tenons à reconnaître que
nous sommes sur le territoire traditionnel
des Mississaugas de la Première Nation de Credit.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Quand on grâce est porté le pays, il s'est porté la croix, ton histoire.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Certainly some regrets for the late arrival of some reports. However, additions to the agenda 8.2D, inclement weather procedure. There will be an oral update from the director. And some changes to the agenda. 8.2B, the enrollment update elementary and secondary has been revised. 8.3A, Directive 9, Annual Equity Accountability Report Card, Revised Regional Learning Choices Operating Procedure has been updated. Peel District School, 8.4, Peel District School Board Policy 88, Freedom of Information and Privacy. And 9.2, the Senior Team Organizational Structure. Those are just either additions, only one addition, the rest are simply changes to the agenda. With that, I will approve the agenda as amended. Special presentations, there are no special presentations this evening. I have no conflict of interest with the agenda items this evening. The regular meeting of the board, October 13th, 2020, I have read those minutes and approved them. There are no notices of motion or petitions this evening. And the next, we're now on item 5.1, which is the section for recognition and retirements. And we'd like to receive as retirements this evening and congratulate the following: Clarence Brown, Sharon Caldwell, Catherine Delben, Christopher Doran, Sheila Edwards, Jane Franklin, Anna Gracunius, Leanne Hope Godfrey, Nancy Horn, Christina Kalwa, Archie Kwan, Kim Meehan, Nancy Newton, Jill Norris, Wilma Pay, Julie Pemberton, Francis Ripley, Christina Rother Adamic, Karen Slade, Karen St. Hill Taylor, Kathy Thompson, Janet Thompson, and Shirley Walt. Thank you all for your many years of service, and we wish you every success in your future endeavors. Item 5.2, Hindu Heritage Month. In December 2017, the Ontario Legislative Assembly declared November as Hindu Heritage Month to recognize the many positive contributions of Hindus residing in Ontario. In the fields of science, education, medicine, law, politics, business, culture, and sports, Hindu Canadians from across Ontario have made their mark in significant ways. This declaration offers the opportunity for Peel District School Board students, their families, and staff to increase their awareness of Hindu culture and heritage within and beyond Canada. We also this month celebrate Indigenous Heritage Month. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are the first peoples of what we now call Canada. Their history marks the beginning of human history here. The Canadian government, through a motion in the House of Commons, declared June as Indigenous Heritage Month. This is an opportune time for This month is also an opportune time for PDSB students, their families, staff, and trustees to continue to engage their treaty relationships by reflecting on the long-standing commitments between the many different Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and Canadians throughout history. Back on June 21st, 2020, National Indigenous Peoples Day, the Peel District School Board honored Indigenous heritage, the diverse cultures, and recognized the achievements of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. In November, during Indigenous Heritage Month, we want to honor the importance of contributions by Indigenous students, staff, and community in education. Item 5.4 is the Peel Custodial and Maintenance Workers Appreciation Day, which we will celebrate on November the 27th, 2020. We celebrate Peel Custodial and Maintenance Workers Appreciation Day on that day. Thanks to all our custodial and maintenance workers for all you do for all of us each day. We are even more grateful for you during this time, for your diligent work in ensuring that we are all kept safe. You provide a fundamental contribution to all we do and are a vital part of the Peel community. Thank you. And finally, I'd also like to recognize that tomorrow is Remembrance Day and say thank you to all those who served so we could live in freedom. We are indeed fortunate to live in this amazing country that we call Canada. Moving on to number 6, we have no delegations this evening. And 7, we have no new business. We now on to number 8.1, which is the director's update, and I'll turn it over to Director Russell Rollins.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. As senior staff, we are proud to open this evening's board meeting with a video of our students. As you know, there has been immense efforts and discussion both inside and outside of this boardroom about health and safety protocols and the operational challenges for both students and staff of online learning during the health pandemic. I want to affirm that we have not lost sight of the PDSB's mission, which is to inspire hope, confidence, and success in each and every student. There is no better way to communicate our focus on success and equity than through the voices of our students. The video that will be shown this evening features the grade 11 students from Jean Augustine Secondary School in teacher Lynn Philiter's English class, which has a focus on Indigenous authors. The students will share with you the impact of choice in their learning materials and varying the options for assessment and evaluation beyond the English essay so many of us know well. In their words, they explain that culturally relevant teaching practices promote excitement, interest, and rigorous learning in ways they may not have experienced previously. From listening to their insights, I hope you will see that how diversifying the resources students use to include a variety of lived experiences is not only possible, but necessary. It is no longer acceptable to promote erasure and invisibility in the teaching of the curriculum. Success and equity have never been and are no longer mutually exclusive. Their learning exemplifies the intent of the PDSB's Empowering Modern Learners document, which has been revised and is on the board agenda this evening. Ms. Philiter and her students are an excellent demonstration of the emergent practices of educators and the brilliance of our students when they have the conditions for learning in their classroom from kindergarten to grade 12. Thank you to the media team and the students and staff at Jean Augustine for sharing their learning with us. Please begin the video when you're ready.
Hi everybody, my name is Richard, and one thing I appreciate about the choice of me having what I read is that the fact that I can connect everything I read to my life experiences. So if I have the chance to pick a book, obviously I'm going to pick a book that connects to my life experiences. And the researches I do, they help me to, the researches I do help me better in life, because some of the books I've read it based on everything I've went through in life or everything I want to know in life. So I like the fact that I have the choice to pick a book based on life experiences, and it's not forcefully given to me by a teacher. That we students have a say in how the system is working for us. So I really think the choice and voice method is actually going good now.
I appreciate the fact that it's all based on interest, but you're still learning, if that makes sense. And I really like it because I feel like it's caused even more joy and success so far in my life. It gives you a voice, for one, and it brings in, when I hear different, especially in a diverse community, when I hear different people talk about their religion or their culture or their identity in a presentation, not only do I get more of an idea of other people in the world and how different people live and act, but I also get to understand that, you know, this world isn't just me, like my worldview.
Also, being able to connect to my lived experiences, culture, identity, and passion is really helpful because it aids me in understanding the book better. If I'm able to connect something that I read to myself, to something that I experience, or to one of my passions, that would help me understand the concept better.
Something that I love about being able to choose what I get to research and the books that I get to read is that I can always pick a topic that I know I'm passionate about and I'm genuinely interested, instead of having teachers assign me a book or assign me a topic to research. For example, in my English class this quadrimester, I was able to choose the book that I read in my literature circle, and others were able to choose their book, or they chose the same book as me. And when we were having discussions about our book, these discussions were so much rich and deeper.
I enjoy getting to choose what I read and what I research because it gives me an opportunity to explore my interests more. I also find that I turn in better work because I'm actually invested in what I'm working on because it interests me. I also think that it helps me consider what I might want to be doing in the future because I get to choose the topics. When it comes to doing blogs, podcasts, and TED Talks over traditional tests and essays, I feel like I gain more skills that will help me in the workplace. Because if I'm just doing tests and memorizing information, that's not a super useful skill compared to creating your own website or learning how to write a blog.
Before I came to Jean Augustine, I just strongly believed that I just suck at school. School's not meant for me. And no matter how sad that made me feel, I was like, yeah, it really is. And when I came to Jean Augustine, I was like, I'm prepared to see how different this learning is, because I have some friends at Jean Augustine and they told me that the school had a different way of doing things. So I was intrigued, and they said that I think you do well here. And they were not lying, because right now I'm taking English, and English is one of my weaker courses. And That's mainly due to the fact that I cannot write essays. I am strong orally, like I can do presentations, TED Talks, debates, but none of that was really an opportunity at my old school. Coming here, I didn't have to write essays the minute I walked into the door. I didn't have to read Shakespeare or classic books that everyone's read. I got to read unique titles from Indigenous authors as it was an Indigenous-based course. And not only did I get to read cool books and learn cool things, but I also got to pick and research my own stuff. My entire curriculum was based off of my choosing. So after I picked the book, I got to write essays, I got to do blog posts, make websites, do podcasts, debates, presentations, pechakuchas, like all of this cool ways to showcase that I understand my learning and I can actually communicate that to my teacher without writing a thesis and a PEA formatted essay was mind-boggling. Because I'm like, whoa, the teacher understands that I can know the book and I understand the main things and what she's teaching me, but I don't have to write an essay on it. I was practically shook. I was like, whoa. And then I realized that it's not something that many schools do. In other schools, we don't have the freedom of choice in our education. It's a very strict, restricted way of teaching. It only caters to one type of learner. But the voice and choice method actually gets you to make your own decisions, become independent, and you can actually connect your experiences to what you're doing in school. And I thought that was also pretty cool. She let us pick our own books, to research our own topics, and create our own types of presentation styles. Really helped me find an identity that I didn't really think I had in academics. Right now, as of this moment, I can tell you that this has helped me build a sense of confidence in my academics and myself and my decision-making skills. I feel more confident and secure in my academics and also in my choices. I've become a very independent learner due to coronavirus, and I feel that the voice and choice method only helped me grow as a person.
Thank you very much again to Ms. Philiter's class and the students who shared their insights into, as they called it, the choice and voice method of learning. I would like to continue with the director's update by focusing on the ministry directives and that we have been working on since our last board meeting. Since our last board meeting, we have appointed Dr. Akwatu Kente to lead the development of the anti-racism policy for the Peel District School Board. We have also filled the Community Outreach Officer position, which was also an action that is mandated within the directives. That role is called the Assistant Director of Equity and Community Relationships and has been filled by Rohan Thompson on an acting basis. We have also started our senior team professional learning in anti-Black racism with Kiko Ojo Thompson, which is really complemented by our ongoing learning at our regular senior team meetings. I also understand that the Board of Trustees has been engaged in professional learning facilitated by Natasha Henry. We continue to develop resources and materials focused on culturally responsive and relevant pedagogy. These resources have been shared in mathematics and related to the days of significance. The development of teaching resources that align with modern learning and equity will continue. We are also in the final phases through the work of Laurie Barnes in the development of the board bylaws. That work has intensified over the last number of weeks and will be ready for presentation at an upcoming board meeting prior to the December break. The search for an integrity commissioner has formally begun, and we look forward to the results of that search, which is occurring through Low Barnes. We also this evening have a report on the changes to the regional choice learning programs. The changes in the admission process for those programs have been made and will be shared later on in this agenda and relate to, I believe it's directive number 9 within the ministry directives to the Peel District School Board. So while there are only a few reports here this evening related directly to the ministry's directions to the Peel District School Board, the work does continue in many different ways as we continue to focus on how we put in place the building blocks to achieve real, lasting, and sustainable change. We look forward to providing specific information with regards to these particular actions and other directives in the form of written reports at our next 2 board meetings. Thank you very much, Supervisor.
Thank you, Director, and thanks to the school for that amazing video. It really was tremendous. Moving on to 8.2, COVID-19 school planning update, the overview, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. As you know, Peel Region was placed in stage red on Friday, November 6th. At this time, staff has not been directed to change any of its protocols. However, we will provide an update if or when further direction is received. As the cases rise in the region, we have also seen an increase in cases. However, the virus transmission in schools remains low. Recently, the Ministry of Education engaged school boards in a proposal to engage in proactive testing at schools as part of a broader plan to support disease control in those jurisdictions in Ontario with substantial disease transmission. School boards in the region, along with Peel Public Health, have agreed to adopt a strategy to address the challenge facing individuals who have been advised to seek testing and are a member of a classroom cohort that has been dismissed. This proactive approach to testing has the potential to limit the spread of COVID throughout a school community. More information will be provided in those situations that this approach warrants by Peel Public Health and or the school. As Director, I want to acknowledge the valuable partnership between Peel Public Health and our staff. On November 18th, secondary students will begin Quadmester 2 and elementary students will begin the second half of Term 1. Change certainly has been constant throughout the fall as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to acknowledge the tremendous resilience and agility that's been demonstrated by both our elementary and secondary principals, vice principals, superintendents, and other staff. They have been dedicated in their efforts to accommodate requests made over a month ago to change from one learning modality to another. They have built timetables that will enable us to ensure that students have choices throughout the rest of the year. I want to again thank them for their professionalism and dedication to Peel students. To complement this change, staff will be engaged in professional learning and will be receiving additional resources. We know that the shift to the community learning model in our secondary schools is significant, and we're committed to providing support. I'd also like to flag for families and for students that there may only be one more opportunity for students to change from one learning mode to another, specifically to move from in-person or adapted learning model in secondary to online learning. That change would take place at the beginning of Term 2 at the elementary panel level and at the beginning of Quadmester 3 for the secondary panel. More information will follow. One of the differences between Quadmester 1 and Quadmester 2 is the transition to a community learning model. The amazing media team has created a short video which will be shared broadly explaining what families and students can expect. Please look for it on our website. Thank you, and this concludes this evening's COVID school planning update.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and thanks to you and staff for being so flexible and nimble as information continues to come in and out, and changing the things that need to be changed. So really appreciate that. 8.2b, the enrollment update, elementary and secondary.
Thank you. I will now ask Associate Director Gill to introduce these two reports.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. In fact, actually, I'm going to ask Controller Wright to introduce this report, and after that, we'll be able to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Associate Director Gill. The enrollment report tonight is in addition to our oral enrollment report received by the board on September 23rd. Beginning with elementary enrollment, as of October 21st of this year, the board had 112,082 elementary students. This represents a growth of 71 elementary students from September to October of this year. The average daily enrollment, or ADE projection, for February 2020 was 15,069 elementary students. Based on this October's enrollment, the revised elementary ADE projection will be 112,457 elementary students, which represents a decline of 2,612 elementary students. The number of online elementary students has increased, as you'll note by the table, one of the tables contained within the report, by 9,236 students, and the number of in-person students has decreased by a similar number, or 9,163, between September and October 2020. Now, secondary enrollment. As of October 15th, 2020, the board had 41,705 secondary students. It appears the board has recovered the majority of secondary students that had not appeared by September 21 of 2020. This represents a growth of 2,091 secondary students, or 5.28% since September. We suspect the staggered start of the school year may have delayed student arrival and verification in the student information system. From September 2019 to October 2020, the board has experienced a secondary student enrollment growth of 279 students. The secondary ADE projection from February 2020 was 41,646 students. Based on this October's secondary enrollment, our revised ADE projection will be 41,571 students, or a decline of 75 students in comparison to the previous number. Also, as you will note in the report, the number of online secondary students has increased by 8,011 students, and the number of in-person secondary students has decreased by 5,290 students between September and October of this year. More on this later in my remarks. Our combined elementary and secondary enrollment, February 2020 projection was 156,715 students. Based on this October's enrollment, the revised or combined ADE of both elementary and secondary students will be 154,028 students, and for what it's worth, 0.78, for a combined decline of 22,686 students. If I had to sum up, we have in fact recovered some students from September to October of this year, but certainly not enough to make up the difference from last year to this. Included in tonight's report are 3 tables showing online and in-person enrollments. The first 3 tables indicate the percentage increase of online versus in-person learning, September to October 2020. And if I could draw your attention to the relatively high incidence of online learners in both elementary and secondary schools in Brampton versus Mississauga and Caledon. Significant difference between the two. And again, Brampton versus Mississauga and Caledon. We've also included in our report tonight 6 graphs examining the potential correlation of factors we initially thought might explain the percentage of online versus in-person learners. Very briefly, the first 4 graphs show no distinct correlation between the identified factors. However, Graph 5 shows there is a moderate correlation between the total COVID-19 case rate, or cases per 100,000 as per the Region of Peel Public Health, and the number of students attending school virtually. In other words, the COVID case rate has a moderate impact on the percentage of families or students opting for online learning. Likewise, Graph 6 shows there is a strong correlation between the percentage of students from racialized groups and the number of students attending schools virtually. In other words, families who self-identify as belonging to a racialized group are much more likely to opt for online learning. Mr. Supervisor, that concludes my remarks. We'll be prepared to address questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wright, for the comprehensive report. I do have a few questions through the director. Let me just clarify again in terms of first for elementary students, have we been able to ascertain the reason for the decline of close to 3,000 students in September and the increase in 71 students in October?
Mr. Supervisor, through Director Russell Rollins, Mr. Supervisor, we are still looking at that. There is a high suspicion of about approximately 900 to 1,000 junior kindergarten students that we believe have been withheld by parents due to the household COVID-19 precautions, and at least another 500 senior kindergarten. That would be certainly a large part, at least the greatest percentage of the explanation for the decline in the enrollment. Still others, the federal government's admission of new Canadians is certainly down, and that is affecting broadly both secondary and elementary school enrollment. We are at this point drilling down to find and to ascertain exactly what that number would be. And I would expect I hypothesize the remainder of those students that are not in our system would likely be, I hypothesize they are in the primary grades and are being held back or retained at home by their parents.
Thank you for that. So assuming that your numbers are, in the are accurate and moderate range, we're talking about 1,100 students out of the 2,600 or so. So the other 1,500 that may have been with us that might currently be in the primary grades as you speculate. Do we have any responsibility or obligation if we know these students have been with us in the past and are currently not with us in terms of attending school?
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor, I would ask Associate Director Grewal to answer the question, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, absolutely, we do. Through our social work department, we are currently in the process of working through that process to find out where the students are and to ensure their safety and well-being, and those are obligations that we have.
Appreciate that. Will we be able to get a little bit of a report back on that once we've been able to kind of get a sense of where they are?
Absolutely, yes.
Great, thank you. Again, through you, Director Russell Rollins, secondary students, I'm just going to clarify, I think I heard you correctly in terms of the 279 and the 0.67 attributed to the fact that students were with us, but we were just not exactly sure where they were. Is that accurate?
That would be correct, sir.
Thank you. Through you again, Director Russell Rollins. In terms of the projected deficit of 2686, what does that translate to approximately in dollars if the ministry were not to fund our enrollment loss?
Thank you. I'd ask Associate Director Gill.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, finance staff is actually in the process of calculating the exact amount of the reduction in our funding, but based on on per pupil funding of almost $10,000 approximately. So that will lead to around a reduction of almost $27 million.
Great, thanks. That was the approximate value that I had. That's interesting. Director Russell Rollins, in terms of, through you again, in terms of the tables that have been presented, and thank you for those, they really are quite helpful. I'm looking at the percentage of students in person versus online by municipality. And I recognize that Brampton clearly is by far away the largest proportion of students that are online. Do we have a sense of the proportionality of students within the system that are enrolled in Brampton?
Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. I would ask Mr. Wright if he could answer that question.
The precise response to that question doesn't spring to mind. Again, to ask back, you are asking for the total number of elementary and secondary students in Brampton versus Mississauga. Correct.
Correct. I'm just trying to get a sense of the correlation between the high numbers in Brampton and whether, in fact, the high numbers are because there are more students in Brampton versus Mississauga and Caledon, or is there another reason that those numbers are high?
It would be another reason. It would not be the distribution of students between the two. I would say, I'm relying on my memory, but the number of students currently enrolled in Brampton and Caledon would not exceed the number of students that are enrolled in Mississauga.
Great, thank you. Through you, Director Russell Rollins, I'm now on the scatter plots that you've provided. Could you provide for the public a sense of what each of those dots represent on that plot?
So you, Director Russell Rollins, again, these are clusters, largely clusters of students. And in the interest of placing them on a grid, as you see in the graph, again, it would be multiple households or students in each cluster represented by a circle.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, actually, in fact, the dot represents a school.
And that's what I was wondering, if it was a school or...
It's a school.
Thanks.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Appreciate that. Because I was just trying to take a look at the outliers in terms of some of that. So there are schools that are outliers. Could you help us understand, Director Russell Rollins, the difference between the first scatter plot, which is the relationship of median household income, and the one that speaks to the third one, which is the student population in poverty?
Thank you. I'm happy to speak to that, but I would invite Mr. Wright to speak to it first, please.
Again, there is a very weak relationship between median household income and the percentage of online learners in this particular chart, which was quite surprising to us. Again, going into this, it was our hypothesis that there would be a correlation, but in fact that proved not to be the case whatsoever by school.
Sorry, Director, did you have something else that you wanted to say?
Thank you. I was going to add that as we continue to do this analysis, as our demographics change, we will look at ways to disaggregate the data further so that we are able to isolate if in fact any trends do occur. This was our first overview, asking some specific questions. We can overlay our census data along with some of the trend data and come up with more precise patterns of attendance. And we're happy to report back on that as we begin the second half of term 1 at the elementary level and quadmester 2 at the secondary level.
Appreciate that. And just as part of that, when you return with some of that information, I think this information is important, and thank you really for doing it. I'm not trying to be critical in any ways, I'm just trying to be more understanding. And so when we get some of that back, I think there'll be some appreciation for the disaggregation of racialized students within the online and the in-person, so that would be helpful as well. I know that anecdotally we're hearing that those that are racialized online are experiencing a great deal of success. And so that might be something that we might want to kind of look at as well. So truly thank you for this detailed information, and I think it's very helpful, and I will receive it as the staff recommendation. Moving on to 8.2C, Air Quality in Schools, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you. I would ask Associate Director Gill to introduce the staff person who will present this report.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and through you, Supervisor Rodriguez. The board, since September 2020, the board has undertaken a number of steps or actions to improve the air quality, filtration, and operation of our HVAC and ventilation systems within our schools, within our buildings. So I'm going to ask Controller Hartzman to highlight these actions, and then we will be able to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Associate Director Gill. Supervisor Rodriguez, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The air quality report submitted summarizes the activities of our facilities and maintenance staff to improve air quality in our schools. This work began over the summer months to prepare for school reopening and will continue throughout the school year. Key points include preventive maintenance on all HVAC, that's heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems in our schools, and addressing any outstanding deficiencies for their operation. Reprogramming of our building automation systems to both ensure that our exterior air dampers allow for the maximum amount of fresh air, and to extend the hours of operation of these systems to improve the number of air changes and air filtration in our schools. Further to this, and with the support of the Ministry of Education by an allocation of approximately $3 million, we were able to undertake the following, and it is underway at our schools at this time, with some of it completed at the end of October. A further increase in the quality of filters for all HVAC systems from a MERV 11 to a MERV 13 high quality filter. An increase in the number of filter changes per year from 3 times to 4 times annually. An inventory of all classroom spaces, including portables, to determine which rooms, by their age of construction, do not have ventilation units was undertaken. And subsequently, the purchasing and installing of 920 standalone filtration units was completed to support the air quality in these rooms. Lastly, we are continuing with a program to update several of our older building automation systems, and we are recommissioning several of our HVAC systems. This work will help to ensure systems continue to operate optimally and properly support improved air circulation and air quality for our staff and students. Thank you, Supervisor Rodriguez. I'll offer the report for your receipt and attempt to answer any questions that I can. Thank you.
Thank you again for the report. Certainly recognize the importance of air quality during this time, and we're truly grateful to you and all the staff for all that you've done that ensures excellent air quality in our schools so that students can enter and certainly be successful and study. From your report, Director Russell Rollins, through you, from your report, can one conclude that every space currently in the entire system has what it needs for our staff and students to be able to breathe clean air, and certainly recognize that you've identified portables will be complete within the next few weeks?
Thank you for that question. Mr. Hartzman?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can confirm that, that all of our teaching spaces do now have those additional filtration units. They have been installed, and all of the filters on our HVAC or ventilation systems, the central systems, have all now also been upgraded to the higher level of filter. So that work has all been completed and was completed by the end of October.
Thank you, appreciate that. Through you, Director Russell Rollins, was the funding that the ministry provided, you identified $3 million, that's part of it obviously, but was the funding sufficient from the ministry, or did we need to top up the funding to ensure we were able to do the work in all of these spaces?
Supervisor Rodriguez, the funding that we received was sufficient for the items that we had identified. We worked, staff worked very closely with ministry staff on the items that they were focusing on, and the items that we have listed and identified and were approved by the ministry were funded completely with the $3 million.
Great, thanks. And just my last question then is, in terms of the items that we needed, was an RFP put out to tender those?
Yes, the purchase of the individual filtration units was done by a tender through our purchasing department, and the filters were purchased similarly through a tender that existed with a vendor for filter replacements with our buildings.
Thank you so much. As per your recommendation, I received the report and thank you for your work on it.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to item 8D, which is the inclement weather procedure oral update. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. Despite the beautiful weather outside over the last number of days, as staff, we have turned our attention to what the winter months may bring. This is an oral report that provides a progress update on the adjustments and revisions that will be made to our inclement weather procedure. During the winter months, the Peel District School Board may need to cancel buses or close schools and administrative offices because of inclement weather. When making the decision, a number of factors come into play. Road conditions, weather forecasts for the full day, conversations and consultations with municipalities who are traveling roads and providing feedback to us in terms of drivability, consultation with neighboring school boards, etc. The safe operation of buses on city and rural roads is taken into consideration as well. The operation of a large school bus is quite different than the operation of a smaller vehicle, especially on rural roads. The decision about cancellations is made in the morning, as weather patterns may shift over a 12-hour period. A decision to cancel busing is normally made by 5:45 a.m. so that it can be communicated to the public by 6 a.m. Cancellation notices are posted on the Stop R website, board websites, and media contacts are notified. While school buildings remain open, board staff make the best decision they can with the information they have available to them at the time. These decisions are not undertaken lightly. The safety of our students and staff is a top priority. Traditionally, in most cases when school buses have been canceled due to inclement weather, schools have remained open for students and staff to attend. This usually results in lower than normal attendance of students, and in some situations, staff are also unable to safely make their way to work despite their best efforts. In order to provide adequate supervision on those days when buses are canceled in a region, classes would be combined in a classroom or a library or a gymnasium. Under the current protocols for enhanced health and safety in schools, this practice would require mixing cohorts of students and staff that would not normally interact with one another. Staff has consulted with Peel Public Health to seek their guidance on whether the combination of cohorts should continue under these circumstances. Peel Public Health has expressed concerns about unnecessarily mixing classroom cohorts and potentially increasing the risk of transmission of the virus. This was a very difficult decision for all of us who had input into it. It has been decided that on days that buses are canceled for a given region of the Peel District School Board, schools will be closed to staff and students who normally attend school in person at the elementary level or in the adapted model in secondary, and teachers would provide synchronous learning as much as possible. So schools would be closed to staff and students, and we would move to remote learning synchronously as much as is possible. Online learning will continue as normal for those students who are currently studying in that modality. We recognize this is potentially a significant change for students and staff and families. This decision was taken based on the guidance from Peel Public Health, the unknown certainty about how the virus will progress over time during the winter season, and it maintains our commitment to do whatever is possible to reduce the spread of the virus through maintaining the integrity of classroom cohorts. Following this decision, sharing this decision this evening, we will build a communication plan out to families so they are well aware of this change in procedure, and we will redouble our efforts to ensure that families are alerted well in advance on those rare occasions where we have to make the decision to cancel buses in a particular region. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, for that important update. Just want to seek clarity on, are there any distinguishing characteristics between a school being closed because of weather or a school where buses are canceled? So in the past, there would have been that distinction. Currently, have I heard you correctly that whether buses are canceled or the school is closed, the same would apply?
Thank you for that question. That's an important distinction. On rare occasions, schools are closed across the district due to inclement weather. We have not made any decisions with regards to adjusting the procedures or clarifying the procedures when there is a district-wide closure of schools and administrative offices. So the changes that are being shared this evening really only represent when buses are canceled in a particular region, and it outlines for families and for staff that rather than making their way to school to continue learning, that in fact we would be making the adjustment for all students to remote learning as synchronously as possible.
Great, thank you for that, appreciate that. And I think I've heard you say correctly that this will also be placed on the website and folks will know well in advance.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, we recognize that a strong communication plan is essential given that this is a change in practice.
Thank you. Moving on to 8.3, Ministry Review Directives Update, Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. We will start with Directive Number 9, the Annual Equity Accountability Report Card, and the revised Regional Learning Choices Operating Procedures. I will simply introduce this report this evening and then turn it over to Associate Director Grewal to speak to the specifics of this report. This is an important report as it outlines actions to be taken to address the underrepresentation of Black and Indigenous students in regional learning choice programs. These are important programs in the Peel District School Board and represent viable learning alternatives for all of our students. As part of the ministry directives to the Peel District School Board, Directive 9 states that as part of the annual Equity Accountability Report Card, the district must report on clearly defined student-centered outcomes which eliminate disparities in achievement of students from the board's various communities. This means establishing accountability measures and responsibilities for using disaggregated data on a number of identity factors, including race. This review, according to the ministry directive, should include an examination of disproportionalities and disparities regarding representation in regional learning choice programs, along with disproportionalities and disparities in other areas. What is clear is that there is a measurable disparity in the percentage of Black and Indigenous students in the board's regional choice learning programs. Simply put, they are underrepresented. While Black students make up 10% of the Peel District School Board's population, they represent 2% in these programs. This is a bold decision for us to open the doors for our students who have been underrepresented for too long in these programs. I will now turn it over to Associate Director Grewal to speak to the specifics of the review that will be undertaken and the decision made this evening.
Great. Thank you, Director. Staff have started this review by looking at the Regional Learning Choices operating procedure and the process in which students are granted entry into Regional Learning Choices programs. And specifically, we're focusing on Black and Indigenous students, those students who self-identify. In the appendix, in Appendix 1, there's data from the student census, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Self-identification data from the 2018 Peel District School Board student census was used to examine representation in Regional Learning Choices programs. Disproportionalities and disparities in the data when it comes to representation of Black and African students in Regional Learning Choices programs is evident. There is insufficient data to share about Indigenous student representation in these programs, given the small sample size of students who self-identified as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in the student census. In Appendix 1, the student census data based on percentage of students in Regional Learning Choices programs by racial background is provided. So in analyzing this data, it is evident that for many elementary Regional Learning Choices programs, and I believe it's all of them but 2, there are so few Black students enrolled that the data cannot be provided for privacy reasons since the number of students is less than 10. The secondary data demonstrates that the representation for Black students is the lowest of all racial groups in the following programs: Advanced Placement, International Baccalaureate, International Business and Technology, Science and Technology. According to the 2018 Peel District School Board census data, 9.5% of students in Peel schools identified, so self-identified as Black, and 0.2% of Peel students identified First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. We felt that was important data to provide in context of the student census data as it relates to regional learning choices. In terms of next steps, based on the student census data, the process of self-identification and admission to the regional learning choices programs will reflect the need to address historically and statistically significant disproportionalities in enrollment, ensuring equitable representation of Black and Indigenous students. There is commitment to review all components of the regional learning choices programs through an anti-racism and anti-oppression lens, including the commitment to include input from Indigenous and Black communities that are currently not represented in these programs. And that is really important, given the importance of working alongside community and co-constructing how we move forward. In the interim, the revised Regional Learning Choices Program operating procedure, which has been provided in Appendix 2, reflects the decision that all Black, African, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students who self-identify and meet the criteria for admission for each of the individual Regional Learning Choices programs will be accepted into the program without participating in the random selection process. This is a necessary first step. And again, we'll highlight first step because we know there needs to be a wholesome review of all of those programs in order to disrupt the systemic inequities that exist for Black and Indigenous students as part of a larger work that deconstructs outcomes for Black and Indigenous students in the areas of pathways and programs. And by that, we mean applied academic special education programs such as gifted, where we might have some underrepresentation, in some cases overrepresentation. This step of addressing disparity and disproportionality in the participation of Black and Indigenous students in regional learning choices programs is a necessary action. This direction is supported by the special programs provision under the Ontario Human Rights Code. Special programs should be designed to help people who experience hardship, discrimination, racism, inequality, and who have been historically disadvantaged. The Ontario Human Rights Commission encourages the development and use of special programs as an effective approach and strategy to address and mitigate systemic racism. The OHRC Special Programs Guidelines have also been provided in this report in Appendix 3. Although no organization is required to apply to the OHRC for permission to run a special program, the Special Programs Guide provides clear direction on how a special program should be designed, the steps that need to be taken, and some of the key considerations that should inform decision-making. Developing a special program by these guidelines accomplishes several things. Firstly, when a special program is designed using a special programs guide, it sets up the program to be defensible in the event there is a human rights challenge. Secondly, the steps that are outlined to inform the development of the special program are promising practices for program design. Through the special programs design process, you have to set out goals, you have to set out targets, you have to set out deadlines, and then you have to set up monitoring pieces as well. As a more comprehensive approach to addressing the disparity and disproportionality of participation rates of Black and Indigenous students in regional learning choices programs, the board will develop an OHRC special program to address this issue. Finally, it's important to note that PDSB is currently utilizing an OHRC special programs provision for the development and implementation of the board-approved focused recruitment of Black and Indigenous educators. The goal of this research evidence-based approach is to assist in improving the academic outcomes of Black and Indigenous students. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins and AD Graywell. I'm going to start, if you don't mind, with Appendix 2. Just want some clarity on a couple of things in Appendix 2. The first one is under application and admission. Near the end, it speaks to the fact that Peel District School Board students or students that live in the region, is there preference given to Peel District School Board students?
Yes, there is.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Now on page 3, the middle of the page of Appendix 2, it speaks to the fact that parents must apply within their boundary, and their boundary based on their home. If the program is full, can they apply to a neighboring boundary?
Associate Director Graywell.
Through you, Chair. Yes, they may, but I will tell you historically, the programs have been filled by those within the boundary.
Right, thank you. On the same page, at the bottom of the page, where it talks about the random selection process, and there may be only a review of the report cards, so it talks about reviewing the report cards. Could you help me understand what exactly is being reviewed in the report cards? Is it grades, learning skills, behavioral comments?
Again, through you, Chair. Yes, it would be learning skills as well as grades. There is also, for each individual regional learning choice programs, there's other criteria as well. Students engage in sometimes a test of some sort, sometimes it's a group learning experience task where they're evaluated by educators. We do know this year, given that some of the reporting pieces are missing due to COVID from the spring, we've mitigated those factors as well.
Thank you. So can I assume then that it's not strictly grades? Is that accurate? Going to page 4 of that appendix, Director Russell Rollins, near the top, they speak about a wait list. Does the wait list have an order?
Again, through you, Supervisor, yes, it does. When we do the randomized selection process and there's a determination made in the students who have been granted entry into the program, other students are then given a number on the wait list.
Great, thank you for that. Now just going back to Appendix 1 for a moment. In Appendix 1, the very first one, under the percentage of students in regional learning programs elementary, the very last line speaks to elementary students where N is identified as 83,185. Could you tell me what the 83,185 represents?
Through you, Chair, that would represent the number of students that engaged in the student census.
And that was by invitation?
Through you, Chair, yes, it was. It was either done for K to 3, it was done by parents, and for 4 to 12, it was done by students, and in the case of students with special education needs, parents would have supported. We had a very high percentage for a return rate for the student census.
Thank you. What is, this is just off, I'm just trying to kind of correlate something in my head here. What is the total number of elementary, what's the total number of elementary students in the system?
Thank you. Through you, I would ask Mr. Wright to answer that question, please.
Through you, Director Russell Rollins, I think I draw attention to the report that I presented earlier this evening. And in that report, I'm just looking, the total number 2020-21 October of elementary students would be 112,082.
So with 83,000 participating in the census, that's a pretty large proportion of close to 75%. You identified the NR as being a suppression rule based on the number 10. Is that always the case that all the NRs are suppressed, or are there any NRs in some of these that would associate with N being 0?
Again, through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, if you look at the bottom of the chart, NR is either not reported, so N is less than 10, or N equals 0. So we're not differentiating, we're just putting it for both. So it could be 0 as well.
Yeah, identified, yeah. And that's, I was just trying to kind of clarify that. So in the case when I'm sort of trying to get a feel for your recommendation in terms of Black and Indigenous students, when I go down the column of elementary and for Black students, I recognize that the NR in each of those each of those programs, that the NR over there could potentially be 0.
That would be correct.
Thank you for that. I have no other questions. I think I've answered the others on my own. So thank you again for the report, and yes, I will receive the report and its recommendations. Moving on to item B, Directive 24 Employment System Review.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Rodriguez. I would ask Associate Director Gill to present the report or to introduce the staff person who will present the report this evening.
Through you, Director Russell Rollins, and I'm going to actually ask Superintendent Robertson to introduce the report.
And thank you, Associate Director Gill, and through you, Supervisor. As part of the ministry review, which was released on March 13th, the directions from the minister included a direction that requires the board to retain an independent expert to conduct a comprehensive employment system review, or an ESR, which includes the implementation of the recommendations of the 2013 Turner Consulting Group research report on hiring and promotion within the Peel District School Board. And within that is a requirement for a report that would be dated September 30th that would submit confirmation that there is an ESR committee as well as a terms of reference. And tonight's report is a report on those steps being taken. An employment system review is a complete review of the various policies, processes, operating procedures, and whatnot associated with human resources and employment. The review consists of a consideration of recruitment, hiring and selection, training and development, retention and termination, upward mobility, organizational culture and work environment, and accommodation accessibility. The review consists of legal compliance, consistency, job relatedness, validity, adverse impact, and accommodation. And a terms of reference has been established for the committee. There are, in fact, two committees. There is an ESR committee reference committee, and then there is a smaller committee that will be representative of various groups associated with the workforce within Peel that will work closer with the consultant and will work to deliver the deliverables on the employment system review. So tonight we provide you with an outline of what the terms of reference is and a description of the committees associated with the employment systems review, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, AD Gill, and Superintendent Robertson. Just got two questions. One is, will there be some inclusion within the review to determine the nature of nepotism and cronyism within the hiring process?
And through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, yes, the nature of the employment system review would be examining the hiring practices and promotion practices within the Peel District School Board, and certainly a question associated with that would be the fair and equitable practices associated with those functions, and the areas that you outlined and the considerations you outlined would be a part of that process as well.
Thank you for that. Through you, Director Russell Rollins, my last question on the report is, I'm assuming there will be recommendations forthcoming from this group. Would you be able to ensure mechanisms for accountability to ensure consistency of application of any policy or guidelines? I'm thinking of just metrics of accountability here.
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, one of the key functions of our Executive Superintendent of System Transformation and Capacity Building will be to ensure that we are monitoring the implementation of recommendations and coming up with accountability frameworks that allow us to report back on the progress that we have made with respect to the actions that we have undertaken.
Thank you. With that, as per staff recommendation, this report is received and is to be submitted to the Minister of Education. Thank you for that. Moving on to 8.4, Peel District School Board Privacy Policy.
Thank you very much. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, this is a new policy before the board this evening, before you this evening. As a district school board, we provide services through our staff to students and to the community. As such, we have a duty under the Act to protect their privacy, as well as to share information about the ways in which we conduct business. This policy makes those obligations, both in terms of sharing information and the protection of privacy, transparent. I'd like to acknowledge that this work was done by Nicole Fernandez, our senior board reporter and Freedom of Information Officer. This report was also developed in consultation with legal services, as well as been undertaken through a review through human rights as well as equity. This report is here for your approval this evening.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Under policy 88, under number 10, compliance, what happens to an employee when they're found to be non-compliant? Does the board have any liability in that case? And how will staff be held accountable?
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, I will ask Ms. Fernandez if she would like to comment.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Director. So the compliance would be, we have a confidentiality expectation that is signed by every employee. And within that confidentiality expectation, we highlight that all staff are expected to ensure the authorized collection, use, disclosure, and retention of personal information and personal health information. In terms of non-compliance, the board is, there is no real penalty in terms of monetary penalties for the board when there is non-compliance, but we have to ensure that whatever systems whatever gaps are there which led to the privacy breaches, that we have addressed them, and the Information and Privacy Commissioner's Office kind of holds us to account. So that's the compliance piece.
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, first of all, thank you very much, Ms. Fernandez. I think it also depends on the nature of the breach, how it occurred, whether it was an intentional sharing of information or whether it was accidental, what was disclosed. So there are a number of factors that I think would go into determining whether or not staff had upheld the expectations as outlined in this policy. That is one of the reasons that this policy has been developed.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thanks, Ms. Fernandez, as well. And my final question on this policy, I recognize that at the end of the policy, it states that the policy is undergoing legal, human rights, and equity review during development. With each of the policies as they come up, I just want to kind of make sure that I'm always keeping the lens of the anti-Black African Caribbean students in mind. And so I'm just going to ask, does the policy in any way place barriers for Black African Caribbean students, parents, staff, or community to access what legally that they can request, or place them in any vulnerable position of disclosure of their personal information or identity?
Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, I do not believe so. We have certainly taken it seriously to have a human rights review and an equity review. And so we do not believe that it poses any additional barriers for Black African and Caribbean students and families.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and thank you, Ms. Fernandez. As per the staff recommendation, I am in receipt of this report. Item 8.5, Empowering Modern Learners, Addendum 2020.
Thank you. I would ask Associate Director Grewal to present this report.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. In mid-October 2020, the Curriculum and Instruction Department released the Empowering Modern Learners Addendum document that you have in front of you. That will replace the original Empowering Modern Learners document from 2016. This is a vision document that we've been using as a cornerstone for teaching and learning pedagogy here in the Peel District School Board. Ironically, the student video that was played earlier today was a fantastic minds-on, I would say, for this report. Educators have embraced innovative practices that foster learning experiences which meet the needs of the students and families we serve in Peel with an ever-changing social context. That has been the purpose of the Modern Learning document. As we navigate the various evolving landscapes, so we know we're engaged in asynchronous, synchronous learning, blended of teaching and learning during the COVID pandemic, the revised components of the Empower Modern Learning's vision document that you have here in terms of Table 1 provides an anti-oppressive and anti-racism lens through which educators must review, revise, and revision their practices. To further support this revisioning, all professional learning provided by central staff will center the revised EML document as the tool used to support the expectation that educators consider curriculum, instruction, assessment, learning culture, learning environments through an anti-oppression lens that centers student lived experiences and intersectional identities. Most recently, we've been engaging in a secondary reorganization, and as we've moved to a community learning model, this document has been at the center of the way the curriculum and instruction special education departments have organized. What I will do is just provide a brief overview in terms of the document that I believe highlight the anti-oppression, anti-racism lens. In this document, we've had 4 belief statements that are centered around what it means to be a learner, what it means to be an educator in terms of the role of community, and then the learning environment itself. What we've added in this document is a 5th belief statement, which I'll read. We must actively confront inequities and barriers that uphold racism and other forms of oppression, so learners of all identities are empowered through education that embraces their identities and lived experiences. That aligns very nicely with the work that we must do around anti-Black racism and other forms of discrimination. I also will highlight the moral imperative statement. The moral imperative statement has been rewritten, and it is an alignment of the principles to support anti-oppressive and anti-racist teaching practices within the goals of the Empower Modern Learners document. That was there in 2016, so that has been revised. We have also, we went through the 6 innovative elements, and the guiding questions for each of those elements have also been changed to encompass our focus on student lived experiences and student identity. And finally, we know oftentimes when we engage in teaching and learning pedagogy, we quote from some of the more normative people who might talk about teaching and learning. We've really tried to change that thinking, and the document ends with a quote by Dr. Christopher Emdin, who talks a lot about pedagogy in this new world where we're trying to center student identity. And he says, and it was in the video as well, the classroom can serve as an example of what the world should look like, all students with equal power, regardless of their culture or background, rather than a replication of what it is. The hope for this document this year is that it's been rolled out to the system. We're using it in our COVID-19 teaching and learning plan. As a system, we're engaging in a collaborative inquiry this year. We pulled this together very quickly because we knew it was imperative, given the ministry directions and given the students that we serve, that we have a document that had an anti-racism and anti-oppression lens. But throughout the year, we will be engaging in focus surveys to gather broader system input into the document with the hopes of doing a full rewrite in the summer of 2021. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and thank you, A.D. Grewal. I really like the changes in the document. I also really like the little matrix that kind of helped me navigate where the changes were and what they sort of related to. So appreciated that work as well. I look forward to the consultations, the reworking of the EML, and certainly its broader future implementation. was kind of torn between asking this question. It really, not even sure it pertains between this section and the section dealing with the programs. And it really is about the representation of the percentage of Black students in gifted programs. And I know that that's being worked on, so on and so forth. I just leave that for your consideration as to where it fits, and to perhaps bring back some information in the near future about that as well. So appreciate this work and really look forward to it. So thank you. As per staff recommendation, this report is also in receipt. Moving on to 8.6, which is the Ellengale Public School Reorganization K-8, Ellengale Public School, Queenston Drive Public School boundary change. Director Russell Rollins.
Thank you very much. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, I would ask Mr. Wright to present this report.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins. Tonight's 8.6 report, which includes the proposed Ellengale reorganization and Ellengale and Queenston Drive boundary change recommendations, will respond favorably to an Ellengale community request to reorganize the school from a K to grade 6 to a K to grade 8 school, and will help balance enrollments between the two schools and relieve enrollment versus capacity matters at Queenston Drive as the community experiences city center population and enrollment growth. If approved, the reorganization of Ellengale and the boundary changes would be phased in beginning with grade 7, effective September 2021. Grade 8 would be added 2022. No students currently attending Queenston Drive would be affected by these changes. The report and recommendations tonight contain a detailed description of the proposed boundaries to ensure full knowledge of the attendance area. If approved, the content of this report will be communicated to families, school councils, and the community in accordance with board procedures and with attention to Peel public health COVID precautions, which may take the form of virtual meetings as may be necessary. That concludes my remarks. Director Russell Rollins, I'm prepared to answer questions.
Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, and thank you, Mr. Wright. I do have a few questions. In the report, Director, it mentions that parents at Ellengale support this change and that school admin, superintendents, and trustees at both schools support this change. Do parents at Queenston also support the change?
You, Director Russell Rollins, yes.
Thank you. What will the enrollment of the grade 7 and 8 cohort be in September 2021 at Ellengale?
Ellengale?
Ellengale, sorry, yeah.
I unfortunately don't have with me the detailed grade breakdown. I can respond, however quickly.
No, that's the reason I asked the question is simply I'm trying to get a feel for, with Ellengale gaining grade 7 and 8, the grade 6s will obviously move to 7 and will probably stay. The grade 8, I'm assuming that the current grade 7s at Queenston will be given the opportunity to either return if they're in boundary or to stay. Is that the intent?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to kind of get a feel for
Yes.
what that cohort would comprise of. What is the on the ground capacity at Ellengale currently?
You'll note that on the first column on page 57, 268 would be the capacity, and Queenston Drive, for what it's worth, is 597. Observing Queenston Drive is roughly twice the capacity as Ellengale. What's interesting, if you don't mind me adding, is the two sites. The larger school, Queenston Drive, is a small site, 5 acres, undulating, hilly, not entirely usable, whereas Ellengale is a larger site, 7 acres, and level. You may wonder why I'm drawing that to your attention. It would be with regard to future growth beyond what this report would consider tonight.
Which leads to my next question. In 2025, the number of portables at Ellengale moved from 5 to 8, and at Queenston moved from 2 to 6. Both appear to be growing in enrollment. Does this appear to be sustainable in the long run?
No, it is not. We have a new school presently under construction as we speak. It is the Elm Drive School, and already with very preliminary development applications shared by the city of Mississauga with the board, we're seeing a need for 2 additional schools that would serve city center. And that is only what we know at the moment. There was, and Trustee Crocker drew attention to this earlier this year, there was a recent announcement by a collection of 4 major developers advising 26 towers over the course of 20 years that will impact these schools and others.
So it sounds like we're en route to an accommodation review at some point.
Yes, sir. That would be correct.
Will there be any impact on programming?
Programming, I would think in the long term, in terms of space, if confining my remarks to space for the moment, Ellengale, I can see, will require significant improvements. Already, I would draw attention to Queenston, having had 2 additions since it was constructed, as well as 2 gyms. It's pretty much at capacity. In terms of program or space improvements to facilitate programs, I will say to you that we are looking seriously at a capital funding request that would address those needs at Ellengale.
Which leads to my next question in terms of classrooms, playgrounds, or gyms need to be retrofitted at Ellengale to accommodate grade 7 and 8 students. I'm assuming that'll be part of that?
Yes, sir. That we would include common area improvements with any additional space that may be required at that school.
And do we currently have an estimated cost to implement this recommendation?
No, we don't. That will be fully vetted when we submit our application for capital funding to the ministry as per their protocol.
And finally, do we foresee any issues that may pertain to disadvantage for students who identify as Black, African, Caribbean, thinking of things like access to transportation, school culture, programming, etc.?
I would defer to my colleagues on the instructional program side. From an accommodation standpoint, we would see improvements overall.
Again, through you, Chair, in terms of impact, as students stay within a school organization for a longer period of time, we know we build strong relationships. In the case of Ellengale and Queenston, these are high English language learner populations that attend this school. So I think in terms of building relationships, it is probably best that they are there from a K-8, through a K-8 model.
Given that, Director, I would recommend that we also have a strong communication strategy in this particular case with the families so that they understand what's going to transpire.
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, we will work on that.
As per staff recommendation, I approve 1, grade reorganization at Ellengale Public School from K-6 to K-8, effective September 2021, and the Ellengale Public School K-8 boundary effective September 21 be as identified in Part A and Part B on page 55 of the agenda, and 3, that the Queenston Drive Public School Grade 7 and 8 boundary effective September 2021 be as identified in Part A and B on page 56 of the agenda. Thank you again, Director Russell Rollins and Mr. Wright for that report. Really appreciate it. Moving on to item 9, items for receipt. I will have receipt of all of those particular items. Director, is there anything in particular that you need to speak to on those items for receipt?
Thank you. Through you, Supervisor Rodriguez, no, there is not.
Thank you. Then I will do all of them together, noting that I will hold all of the items from 9.5 because that will only be available on future agendas. So thank you for that. And I believe, Madam Reporter, that is all of it. Is there anything that I've missed? Correct. So 9.1 through to 9.4 I'm going to accept as receipt, and 9.5 to 9.8 I will leave in abeyance because that's going to be forthcoming. So thank you. Great. Having done all of that, I move to adjourn our meeting. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.